David and Sarah had no idea what they were walking into when they found an old, tiny stone house buried deep in the forest. They couldn't find any details about it online, like nobody had ever found this spot before. And while they were confused at first by what they saw, looking inside the house also made them afraid. David and Sarah looked completely puzzled by what they were staring at. Why would there be a tiny stone house in the middle of the woods? From how it appeared, it must have been sitting there for a long time. They slowly and carefully started walking toward it. As they got closer and closer, they started hearing a weird sound that didn't fit in the forest. They quickly realized that the noise was coming from inside the stone house. Sarah used her phone's light to look into the house and see what was going on. "David, you won't believe what I'm looking at," she said. David watched her expression change as she carefully reached her hand inside the house, trying to pull something out. But what had Sarah found inside the tiny stone house? What was it doing there, and why hadn't anyone found it before? As people who hiked a lot, not much shocked David or Sarah these days. After hiking together for 15 years, they had know-how and trust in their skills and their ability to deal with whatever they ran into. They had seen some really amazing things before and lived to tell about them. They had found everything from camps where homeless people stayed to wild animals in the weirdest places while they were out in nature. The police had even been called once after David and Sarah told them about strange things they had seen. But what they were about to find would easily be the weirdest thing on their list forever. One Saturday afternoon, David and Sarah were getting ready for another hiking trip in the nature park near their home. They had their usual routine and always used a list to make sure they didn't forget anything important. This time, they planned to go deep into the woods, a trip that would take up most of the daylight they had left. Their good friend Christopher was coming with them. When they told him about their plans to go to the middle of the forest, he seemed very excited about joining them, even though he wasn't really an outdoor type. David and Sarah had no reason to wonder why he wanted to come, so they were happy to have him along. But Christopher was keeping something from them. When they met Christopher at the edge of the forest, the weather was perfect for late morning. The only issue was the dark shadow hanging over the forest that made it look somewhat scary. As they walked into the darker trees, the path to the middle of the forest wasn't easy for beginners. But David and Sarah had lots of experience. They kept watch on Christopher, who seemed to struggle with some of the steeper parts. Still, he was clearly determined to keep going. They had barely seen any animals all day. David felt silly for not noticing it sooner. Usually, the park was full of small animals like rabbits and squirrels. Even if they couldn't see them directly, there was always some sound in the background. But that day, there were only a few birds flying in circles above them. The other weird thing was that none of the trails seemed to match their maps. The markers and paths in the real forest were different. None of them seemed to lead to the middle of the park. Had they gotten lost? Sarah suggested that maybe they weren't supposed to be in that part of the park, but neither of them had. Ever seen signs saying that? They tried to look at a satellite view on their phones, but there was no cell service in the more remote areas. Instead, Christopher picked a trail and said that maybe they would find something soon. David and Sarah followed him. David and Sarah decided to follow Christopher and keep going in the same direction they had been going. As they walked deeper into the trees, David couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't make sense. Finally, Sarah decided to stop and check where they were again. She managed to get a weak signal on their GPS device that showed they were close to the middle of the park. Happy that they had been going the right way, after all, she didn't even think about what they might find when they reached where they were going. When they arrived at the middle of the forest, there was a surprising amount of open space with lots of light coming through the treetops. Christopher was clearly excited to get there and started walking faster. But when David and Sarah stepped into the light, they realized there was something else in the clearing. David approached carefully, wondering what he was seeing in a shaded area of the field. He took a few steps closer and suddenly fell down, his foot caught in something. Sarah hurried over to help him take off his boot and get free. When they looked around, Christopher was gone. As David and Sarah looked for Christopher, they noticed there was a series of wires that seemed to go around the edge of the clearing. They were about knee-high and looked like they were meant to make people trip. Feeling worried, they decided to follow the wires to see where they went. "Up ahead," David said, realizing that the structure he had seen earlier was actually a small stone house. Based on the ivy growing on it, it looked like it had been there for a long time. But why would anyone bother putting wires around an abandoned house? Could the wires have been for something else? David looked more closely at the house. Maybe it wasn't abandoned after all. Suddenly, Christopher came out from the other side of the house. Like David and Sarah, he had been trying to figure out what the wires were for. He showed them an area next to the house where there were even more wires at different heights. Before they could decide what to do next, they heard a strange noise coming from somewhere nearby. When they listened more carefully, it almost sounded like ticking. The open space made it hard to find where the sound was coming from, but Sarah tracked it to the back of the old house. It was clear that there was something or someone still inside. David didn't want to go any closer in case it was a bomb, but Christopher and Sarah couldn't resist their curiosity. Sarah found a small window on the ground floor where she could look inside. At first, all she could see was empty space. It was too dark to see what was on the other side of the room. She took out her flashlight and held it up to the window to see better. When she shined light into the house, Sarah saw that there was a small box connected to the wires. It didn't look dangerous, and she had to know why someone had put a device so far out in the middle of nowhere. Christopher was eager to help her open the small window, and she slowly pulled it in using the wires that ran under the window frame. Sarah turned the box over in her hands and almost gasped as she showed it to David and Christopher. There was an antenna attached to the other side, and red lights were blinking urgently. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. David believed it was a type of warning system that would go off when anyone walked into the open space. Someone was aware they were there. Sarah felt unsafe. She wanted to get out of the woods immediately. Christopher and David weren't as frightened. They felt thrilled and excited. They wanted to understand what this was about. What could this mean? Why was this structure so special to someone that they would place something like this inside it? Then, Christopher quickly noticed something up in one of the trees. He couldn't make out what it was initially, but he needed to move closer. Sarah pleaded with them to ignore it and just return to where they started. "Why does this matter so much to you two?" she wondered. Then Christopher realized what it was. It was a recording device mounted on the tree. Now they were certain someone was aware of their presence, and they could actually watch them too. This little structure was obviously special to someone if they were monitoring it. Was there something more hidden inside it? Sarah then noticed a sound far away. She felt her heart freeze for a second. Who was moving toward them? Sarah rushed to David and Christopher and alerted them. "Someone's approaching," she announced. The two men were still examining the small structure. They couldn't discover anything worthwhile. When they learned from Sarah that someone was coming closer, they didn't want to remain. They wanted to return another time. Without hesitation, the group began running. They couldn't afford to wait for someone to reach them. What if they meant harm? Christopher grabbed the device with him. He wanted to learn what it was. They then noticed someone shouting far away. Sarah was now even more frightened. The device suddenly began making noise again. "Throw it away!" David yelled to Christopher. "They can probably follow that thing." Christopher was very headstrong. He didn't want to abandon it. Why was this so meaningful to Christopher that he couldn't leave it there? Did he have a hidden agenda? Suddenly, Sarah stumbled over a branch and David returned to assist her. Christopher, though, continued running. David called out to him, but he wouldn't pay attention. Then David and Sarah noticed dogs howling. They felt they needed to escape from there, but their main objective was to get out of the woods without being harmed by whatever was pursuing them. They felt like someone was approaching. The howling was becoming stronger, too. Sarah injured herself and couldn't keep running. David positioned himself in front of Sarah. He wouldn't allow anyone or anything to harm his wife. She meant too much to him. Then, suddenly, the dog was summoned back and a man walked toward them. The man emerged through the trees, dressed in a ranger outfit but holding what appeared to be a weapon. "Halt right there! Don't move!" he called out to them. David lifted his hands, his heart racing. "We're just people hiking," he responded. "We became lost." The man came closer slowly, his eyes looking around the area near them. "I'm Ranger William," he announced, still maintaining his distance. "This is a forbidden area. You shouldn't be here." "Forbidden?" Sarah questioned, bewildered. "There weren't any warning signs anywhere." William's look was serious and distrustful. "What were you doing at that structure?" he asked firmly. "How do you know about the structure?" David questioned. Suddenly, understanding, this man knew more than he was revealing. William disregarded the question. "Where's the third person? We followed 3 people coming into this area." David and Sarah looked at each other with concern. "Our friend Christopher," Sarah said carefully. He grabbed something from the structure." William's expression grew dark. "He grabbed what specifically?" "Some type of gadget with an antenna and flashing lights," David described. "Listen, we didn't realize we weren't allowed to be here." For several stressful minutes, William just watched them, clearly thinking about what to do. "Come with me," he eventually said. "We need to locate your friend before he gets into real trouble." As they moved, William stayed quiet despite their questions. He guided them back toward the forest border, sometimes checking a gadget in his hand. "There," he indicated. "Your friend is just up ahead." They discovered Christopher sitting on a dead tree, the gadget next to him. When he noticed William, his face turned white. "I was just going to return this," Christopher said hurriedly, getting up. William approached and carefully took the gadget, checking it for damage. "Do you understand what you nearly did?" he asked, his voice still harsh. "This isn't some plaything you can just grab." "What is it?" Christopher asked, truly puzzled. William studied all 3 of them for a long time, as if choosing whether to believe them. "It's a movement detector," he finally explained. "Part of a study project." "What type of study?" Sarah insisted. William paused again, then breathed deeply. "There have been reports of a creature in this area that shouldn't be here," he said carefully. "Something that could be very significant for science." "What type of creature?" David asked. "I can't reveal more than that," William answered strictly. "But this gadget helps us watch the area without bothering whatever might be living there." Christopher seemed let down. "I thought it might be something more thrilling." "This is thrilling," William said, his voice becoming slightly gentler. "If we're correct about what's here, it could transform what we understand about animals in this area." "Why all the hiding?" Sarah asked. William appeared uncomfortable. "Because if news spreads before we have solid evidence, This place will be flooded with people trying to witness it themselves. That would ruin any opportunity of studying it correctly. The group remained quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for grabbing the gadget," Christopher said at last. "I should have ignored it." William agreed. "Just keep this between yourselves, all right? At least until we're certain what we're handling." They all promised. Months afterward, David and Sarah noticed a brief article in the local paper about an uncommon species finding in the preserve. William was mentioned as the main researcher, and he spoke about thanking local hikers who helped guard the research location. They never shared their adventure with anyone, but sometimes they questioned what exactly William had been following in those woods. Did you like this story? Would you have taken the strange object like Christopher or left it there? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and hit the like button. Don't take things that aren't yours. They might be important to someone else. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Have a good day.